And then, okay, at the end of that, then what happens is that soon afterwards, and I think perhaps immediately afterwards, the story of Abraham emerges. And that's really, I would say that's when the prime myths, the primal myths, take on a more historical element, and history, you know, roughly speaking, history as we know it begins, something like 6,000 years ago. So, and then you know, the rest of the biblical stories proceed apace from there. What basically happens is that this is something that was well mapped out by Northrop Frye, and you'd think at the University of Toronto that you all would have been encouraged to read Northrop Frye because he was perhaps the greatest literary scholar that the University of Toronto ever produced. And what he outlined the Old Testament very interestingly. He said that what happens after these initial stories is that the state arises. So it's like the Tower of Babel is continually rebuilt over and over, and it's the state of Israel. The Israelites get their act together, build a state. What happens? They get corrupt. A prophet comes up and says, you better watch out because what you're doing is not making God happy. And the prophets are very brave because they come forward. The kings are authoritarian. They can kill them at an instant, but the prophets are moved by walking with God, let's say, for lack of a better argument. They come to the king and say, look, you're not caring for the widows and the children, right? And you think that's okay because they're weak. It's not okay. You're breaking the covenant. You're breaking the rules. And the price for that is, well, we already saw it. The price for that is the flood. It's like, get your act together or you're going to be sorry. Now, sometimes the kings to whom the prophets speak listen, but often they don't. And then the whole bloody state is demolished. And then the Israelites are back like they're enslaved or they get wiped out by their enemies, or like it's a complete bloody catastrophe and it lasts for centuries. And then they kind of struggle back up and make another state, and then they get arrogant, and then it gets corrupt, and then a prophet comes along and says, you know what happened last time? It's like, well, that was 600 years ago, right? And I know everything now, so I don't have to pay any attention to you. They ignore it, and then, and the prophets say, you are violating a fundamental moral order. You're supposed to, as king, you're supposed to be subject to something higher than yourself, right? And it's like the idea that the Mesopotamians had that the emperor was supposed to be an emissary of Marduk. That's why he was the emperor, because he was a good Marduk. He could confront chaos and make order. That was what gave him his sovereignty. Or the Egyptian pharaoh was a combination of Osiris and Horus. That's what gave him sovereignty. And so the idea was you get to be king, but you have to act out the spirit of being king. And if you don't do that, then, well, king or not, all hell's going to break loose for you. And that's what the prophets continually say. But the Israelites, you know, they don't pay enough attention and they continue to get absolutely demolished. And so the Old Testament can be read, at least in part, as the description of a sequence of the rise and fall of states and their descent into corruption and chaos.